So I've been involved in several enterprise deployments in software. And I've learned a lot about how people interact with software. And I think everyone here in this room is pretty familiar with how important software is. I mean, we use it professionally. We use it in our professional lives and personal lives to get stuff done, to accomplish our goals. However, I've noticed oftentimes we face this trade-off. And this trade-off is when we use software, the functions that it takes to actually accomplish different tasks in software, and when we have to invest time into actually learning functions or learning a certain set of functions in a software, the trade-off is to versus the benefit. And so sometimes we have to meet deadlines, and we don't have time to learn all these complicated configurations of buttons. Now, does this mean that software is bad? Well, no, I don't think that's the case at all. In fact, UX, which stands for user experience, is pretty much a science at this point. And software is more intuitive than it's ever been before. So it's not that software is bad. Now, I know that the time value trade-off thing that I just mentioned, I know it's a very basic assessment that we apply to everything in life. But I feel that we need to hold software to a higher standard. Because the way I see it, software is really a blank canvas. It's pretty much a virtual world that humans created. And so we shouldn't be dealing with these types of trade-offs, right? We should have more control in the world that we created. So what this talk is about is aligning software with our natural human psychology and our cognitive strengths. So I want to share an exercise I did, or talk about an exercise that I did, where I hosted an event alongside a nonprofit foundation. We hosted a great event at the NASA Kennedy Space Center. And one small exercise in the event, it was a larger event, but we had a small exercise where we had these students sitting at groups of 6. And once the exercise started, we started a timer, and we gave them a problem-solving task, a critical thinking task. And immediately, what I noticed was this explosive, productive dialogue. I mean, students sitting at groups of 6, and maybe 2 people start talking to each other, and maybe some others are a little quieter, and then maybe some of them start joining in the conversation, and then somebody else disagrees, right? And then they all come to consensus at the end. And I was, standing, walking around, and I was watching this happen. And what I later realized was they were learning from each other, right? Because they were sharing experiences with each other, and they were productively getting towards the goal. So if that's the case, what I realized was that what I was witnessing was something called the social constructivism theory, which states that humans are social learners. And I subscribe to that theory because I saw it firsthand, and I've experienced it myself. And so when we tie this back to software, when I'm sitting in front of a spreadsheet, it's a blank spreadsheet, and I'm trying to come up with solutions, and I'm trying to learn the software, learn different formulas and functions, it's very difficult. I mean, I wish I had the ability to have a conversation with 6 people to discuss my problems, but sometimes it's just us in front of a computer. And so I think this is really where what's been happening over the past year, a little bit over a year now, is we've seen this new AI technology called large language models that are starting to prove itself as being this new primary interface. Natural language will kind of be the new way of interface. And if that's the case, then, I used to be a video editor in high school, and then I went on to do data science. But when I was a video editor, I spent 2 hours once cutting out the word from an interview, saying And so it took a while. Now, does that mean that the future of video editing would be someone just telling a model, just saying, hey, can you cut out all the ums for me, and it'll do it? I think it's totally possible, and I think what would probably happen is the model would understand the context of what you're asking to do, and then we've already seen research papers that have shown that these models are actually able to utilize our software. And so it will be able to execute it. But I think what this will look like in a larger workflow, not just like a one command, but in a larger workflow, it might actually look like, actually when I used to do interviews, the first thing I would ask an interviewee would be, can you please say your first and last name, and can you spell it out for me so I could write it down later? And so I go home and start video editing, and I'd have to listen through all the clips and make sure I got the spelling right, and it took time, and that was a small part of the video editing process. But then I started thinking now, right, what would this look like? What would a large workflow actually look like? So I think the future would be you talking to a model and saying things like, can you please go through all of the interviews that I did that day, and can you extract the first and last name? I asked them to spell it out for me. Can you find the spelling, and can you provide it to me in an alphabetical list? I need to give it to my website person. And while you're at it, can you remove the first part of each clip, because I don't want the part where I ask them for their name. And then you kind of review the output, and then you would just continue that conversation. And actually, can you just remove all the parts where I'm asking any questions? I actually just want I just want to actually see the interviewee's responses. And so what previously took many hours, cutting different parts of videos, now becomes a more intuitive conversation. Now, I don't think this level of integration is going to happen tomorrow. I mean, we've seen this technology out for a year now, and we haven't really seen a deep level of integration with software. So I think really what's going to happen next is we're going to start seeing the operating systems. This is my prediction. Operating systems like Windows, iOS, Android, they all have their assistants, like Siri and Google Assistant. And I think it's very possible that we might come to a point very soon where it actually becomes faster to ask Siri to order a pizza on our behalf, faster than we could actually click through screens. And sometimes I'm driving, right, or I'm about to get in my car, and it would be nice to just ask. And if the model understands the context, and it's actually able to execute that and navigate through the screens of a pizza app, then that's very interesting. So, the pizza apps might make their own models as well, right? But perhaps if an operating system does it first, then maybe those softwares might want to actually tie into that framework. I mean, just look at what happened when iOS really started their App Store. All these different software companies wanted to be on the App Store as quickly as possible. And now if we start seeing this again, where natural language becomes this new centralized framework, this is just my prediction, but we'll probably see that happening. And so I also want to touch on something which is a very genuine concern, which is job displacement. What happens when these models actually attempt to automate our workflows? And I will say there's a positive spin to this, because take a look at my video editing example. I didn't just tell the model, just do the whole video editing process for me. I didn't just say to do it all for me. It was more of a back and forth dialogue. And I think that's really the point that we need to really consider, is that it's not just a single prompt. When we accomplish our work, we are doing very large end-to-end workflows, among other things, of course, like having real human conversation. But we have end-to-end workflows that we do, and we do that in our professions. And I think if we start to think about all the different intermediate decision-making points that we do inside of our workflows, then we could start to think a little bit more of how this technology might actually be able to help us execute our work faster, making that in an intuitive fashion, actually speaking to it intuitively. And so I think for the first time ever, people outside of computer science will actually have this ability, right? Because most people have been just passive users of tech, right? And don't really participate in redefining what software architecture looks like. And I'm not talking about software architecture and databases. I'm really referring to the actual business process and the way that we interact with it from a business perspective and execute work. And so if we start to think about it that way, I feel we could all be more active participants in shaping what software will look like using this new technology. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.